So give us a little bit of background just for our audience about your career. After school, where did you go and what happened?
Okay, so my first life, I was an investigative reporter. It wasn't what I'd quite planned out. I wanted to be a feature writer, and it's something that I think is also a lesson to younger people because I didn't expect any more than that. And then I get out in the workplace, and I had this editor who said, I'll hire you for features, but only after you do a year on the city desk because you can't write a good feature if you can't write a good news story. So I get in there, and then it was really evident, and he finally said, Germer, you could find controversy under a rock. So I was a very aggressive investigative reporter. I have memories of people literally running to get away from me. And it was a very intense and rewarding career until it wasn't. There was a moment when I just felt like I'd done it, and I wanted to do something else, and I didn't know what it was going to be. So I kept plugging away, and something that bought me some time was I took a screenwriting class at night at the University of Colorado because if you have something else to keep you busy and stimulated, you can have time to figure out what you're going to do. And in the meantime, we got what I have come to term a new boss hole at the paper, and this guy is similar to some of the people that almost everybody works with at their time. And he said, you think you're going to be a columnist, you'll never be a columnist, you'll never be more than you are right now. And I've found that in life, sometimes he's not a mentor, he's a tormentor, the opposite, but he was a great mentor because if I hadn't had that bad experience, I wouldn't have pushed myself out to figure out what I needed to do. And eventually, I stopped trying to win his approval, and I left the Rocky Mountain News, and I took an editing job at the Tampa Tribune and used all the skills that I had as a reporter, hard-charging, no BS, very impatient, get it done now, and went into this realm where I was supposed to win friends and influence people, and I sucked. I was the worst boss. I didn't know what to do. So I looked for a book telling me how to be effective as a strong woman in a very male-dominated environment, and there wasn't anything. So went and started strategizing what to do if I were going to write such a book, and that's a whole story in itself, and started interviewing great leaders and got such a tremendous array of people in this first book who all said, you have to take a risk, you have to bet on yourself, and I did. I quit my job to do this, and then the book didn't sell. It was rejected everywhere. And what seemed like my greatest failure was, again, one of these obstacle course moments where you have to say, okay, what do I have to do to figure this out? And kept pushing and eventually figured out the problem. I had to reformat the book, had a bidding war on it. It came out the day before 9/11, so they canceled my tour, and I fought my way through that. I rented a car, traveled all over the country to promote it, and wrote 29 letters to Oprah. One of them worked, I don't know which one. And then I had a new life as a speaker. And it was this whole set of dominoes that makes sense perfectly now that I'm here. But as it was going on, it was really very difficult and emotionally trying to say, am I failing? And what am I doing wrong? And I'm a loser, and then just having to have enough courage to keep moving forward. And so I always tell this story on stage because it's about the obstacle course that we face. And really, when that first book was getting rejected, that's when I learned about obstacles, because I'd had them before, but I didn't understand the trick with obstacles is that you say, oh, that's an obstacle. What am I going to do to get around it? And so that's what I do now. I see something that's a bump in the road. It's like, okay, what do we do now? Because that's all it is.
So you mentioned tormentors, and you mentioned that tormentor being a mentor, and that the issue of mentorship is really important for a young person leaving college. Could you speak to them about your experience in having mentors? I'm sure you've been a mentor. Love to hear about the people and how you've approached getting mentors in your life.
My greatest mentors were accidental mentors. They were people who were kind to me, who I'd asked to go to lunch, and they would say something that I needed to hear on that particular day that somehow made me change my life. I can give you examples. One of the women in my first book was Betty Williams. She got the Nobel Peace Prize for the nonviolence movement in Northern Ireland. And I had met her when I was a reporter, and we had stayed friends. And all these people I kept interviewing said, take a risk. You have to bet on yourself. And then I'm thinking of quitting my job. And I call her. I said, Betty, I'm thinking of quitting. And she said the words that are the title of my speech. She said, darling, you will never learn to fly until you jump off the cliff. Well, it was that. And then that same day, I interviewed Sylvia Earle, the oceanographer, who described risk-taking. And I said, yeah, but have you ever failed? And she described this colossal failure where she had taken every dime she had, put it in a business so that people like us could drive in little submersibles at the bottom of the sea, right? And she put her best friend in as the CEO, and he ran it into the ground in 2 years. And she's broke in her 60s. And I said, oh, wow, I bet that made you bitter. And she said, no. She said, I got the learning. I got the knowledge. And then she rattled off 10 things she learned, and she goes, I can always make more money later, which is a lesson to everybody. I always say this because we're so afraid that if we fail at something, we're going to be broke and alone and eating out of garbage pails on the street. And the truth is, if you're smart, you can always make more money later. So that was kind of a passing one. That when my book wasn't getting published, a friend of mine was getting her book published, and one of the things she said, you ought to be a professional speaker. And I said, well, what? You can make money doing that? She goes, yeah, you can make a lot of money doing that. And I checked it out, sure enough. And so it was a combination of hearing suggestions from people who are well-meaning, who have insight that you don't necessarily have, and then picking up on them to follow through. Because I always say, the universe gives you every bit of information you need. You just have to hear it. So that when she said professional speaker, I had to follow through. When I did a speech in Dallas, there was the executive vice president of Michaels Corporation, the stores. And he's Chinese. And he said, you should do a book like this in China. And I said, and I'm like, oh, that would be good. And he goes, well, what do you think of China? And, you're asking an American, what do you think of China? It's like, how do you say it? I said, well, did a good job on the Olympics. And he goes, what do you really think? And I said, well, there are a lot of guys in black suits coming and buying all our treasury bonds to ruin our country. He says, well, you need to go there. And I said, well, you should take me. And he goes, well, follow up. And let me tell you something, that's where 99% of the people drop the ball, is they don't follow up. Well, I called him immediately when I got back, and he says, okay, let's do it. So he planned out this big speaking tour for me to go to China and Taiwan with him and some other executives. I knew this was a universal prompt. You have to hear that. You have to see it. So I had my website translated into Chinese. I got Chinese business cards, and I made the most of that moment. So mentoring to me is a much bigger concept than finding someone who's going to carry me through. I never really had that. And also I think that may be a little bit generational, because there wasn't as much of an effort to do that with women in the workplace until now. Now you see it. And there's a big difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And I always tell people, you need mentors that coach you through it, but you need sponsors who push you and make the calls. And that's all good. But you also need a really good kitchen cabinet of advisors and people you trust who you can say, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? People will be honest with you. So it all comes together. And I know it's a little bit of a different approach, but it is something that will serve many people very well, because they just have to hear the messages because you're getting them. It was an early success that taught me a lot about just digging a little bit deeper, that the truth was always one more phone call away, and particularly in terms of sales. Now, I'm cynical, I'm a journalist, I end up being a speaker. When my first book comes out, it's 9/11, everybody's in a panic. It comes out September the 11th. I have a 3-month window to make it sell, or it's going to come off the shelves. And that means I'm out selling during the Christmas season. And as an author, there is nothing more excruciating than going to a Barnes & Noble and selling books, hand-to-hand combat, nobody's in there, and I just did it. I would stand up, I would go up to people, I'd hand them the book, I'd say, I'm Fawn Germer, this is my book. And once it was on Oprah, it was easier. I would say that it was on Oprah, and then they'd say, oh, what is it, right? But I learned quickly I didn't want to be in Barnes & Noble. I wanted to be in Walden Books, because in Walden's, it's a mall store. People are going to come, they want to leave. So I would sell these books, and I would not leave the store until I sold every single one of them. And I'd go, and my target for this book on successful women was men, because it's Christmas time and guys didn't know what to buy for women. And so I'd go up to them and say, "Hi, I'm Fawn Germer. This is my best-selling book. It was on Oprah. This is a gift you can give to all the women on your list. It'll look like you planned it months ago. I'll sign it personally for you." And I wouldn't leave till I sold everything they had that day. Well, it wound up being a national bestseller on Walden, the highest one that wasn't one of the top 10, guru bestsellers. And that was because I wouldn't leave the store. And so Christmas Eve, the mall it closes early. And I'm walking out and the sun is setting, and I thought, oh my God, you learned how to sell. Because that was not in my nature at all. And it's something that I have had to learn since, because as a speaker, I'm the product, have to always sell it. So what I've learned is one step further than the truth is always one more phone call away. It's that closing the deal is one more call away. Be uncomfortable. If you still haven't gotten a no, make another call, because it might be a yes. Keep on going and don't stop. And one more thing, if this isn't getting too long, is that early on, I shared a consultant on speaking and paid her a bunch of money to teach me how to get more speaking, because that's books supplement the speaking. And she said, you have to have a positioning statement. So what we came up with was, "Hi, I'm Fawn Germer. I work with organizations and companies that want more courageous and creative performance from their people. I do this with the lessons from my best-selling book, Hard-Won Wisdom, which was on Oprah." So you're supposed to make these cold calls to these meeting planners and say that. And she gave me all this information, and I came home, and I decided, after about 2 months of not making a single cold call, I had to do it. So I said, you have to make one call today, because otherwise you've wasted all that money. So I make my one cold call, and I dial this meeting planner, and I get her voicemail. I'm relieved for that. And it comes, and I go, "Hi, I'm Fawn Germer. I work with organizations and corporations that want more," and then it beeped. And I'm like, is that the end? Did it cut me off? And am I still talking? Is it recording? And then it beeped again, and I looked at my phone, and it was my neighbor, Kathy Krasinski, calling to ask if I would speak at her son's 8th grade graduation. So, right? Okay. So, and then I sound like such a loser as I'm wrapping this call up. And so then I get off, and I'm like, oh, God, that went horribly. And I started thinking about it. This person does not know you and will never see you. And you have nothing to lose. This is a real lesson for people who are making sales contacts, okay? Nothing to lose. But you have to do it your way. You have to be who you are. So I send this woman an email, say, "Hi, I'm Fawn Germer. I'm the person who sent you that ridiculous voicemail, and it beeped in the middle of it, and I thought it was you cutting me off, and instead it was my neighbor asking me to speak at her son's 8th grade graduation. I'm not a loser. I have been nominated 4 times for the Pulitzer Prize, and I have a best-selling Oprah book, and I would love to send you my materials and see about speaking with you." And she writes back, she goes, "I'm still laughing from this email. Yeah, send me your stuff." And I got a speech out of it. So the lesson for me was you have to make the call, because if you don't ask, you don't get, right? And you ask and ask and ask until you get or don't get. And then be yourself. Because if you have a rehearsed speech, people know that. They're not comfortable with that. So, yeah, it's been quite a learning curve, but very enjoyable to go and learn something so completely different.